The Sonos Era 100 and 300 speakers were announced both on the 7th of March 2023 and will be made available from the 28th of March onwards. Now, pre-orders have already started, and if you want to be one of the first to get these speakers on the 28th of March itself, you would want to place the pre-orders right now. But new generation products from any manufacturers, not just Sonos, are dangerous gambles if you haven't actually heard or used them before. So I'm here today to give you my listening impression of the new Sonos Era speakers, both the 100 and the 300. Why? Because I have heard them in person before. Now, like I do in most of my videos, I try to give you an upfront summary, a simple one with regards to the sound, right? Features are easy to get down in writing, so we know that they now have line-in and Bluetooth, and the Era 300 has upward firing drivers for Atmos music and soundtrack. But sound is something else altogether and is pretty subjective. So here goes. Now, the Era 100 sounds much better than the Sonos One. There's stronger bass and there's much wider soundstage. The treble is probably on par, but the mid-range is way fuller and there's much more vocal presence than the ones. Now, the Era 300 is a soundstage monster, way wider than the Era 100, bigger projected stereo imaging than the Play 3s that it replaces. Now, the bass is definitely way better than the Play 3s, but it is not close to the Sonos 5s. Again, treble was hard to evaluate because it was so diffuse, because it's firing all over the place. Now, mid-range shines through here as well. And on the demo vocal soundtracks, it really punches like a mid-fi speaker, putting vocals front and center. So that was a quick upfront summary. For those of you who have a bit more time, do stay on in the video. If you have enough information from the upfront summary already, go ahead and do the pre-order. Or not, right? Either way, thanks for dropping by, and if I've helped you make a decision in any way, do consider dropping a like for this video and subscribing to this channel if you want to catch my upcoming videos on the in-depth hands-on review of the Era speakers in multiple configurations over the next couple of weeks or even months. For now, I'd like to go a little bit more in depth with regards to my listening experience with the Sonos Era speakers. Now, the Era 100 is a Sonos One replacement. It doesn't have upward firing drivers for Atmos, but it performs both music duties as well as surround sound duties. Now, when you listen to a single Era 100, it manages to throw out a stereo soundstage because there are now left and right firing tweeters. Now, the stereo separation is apparent, and you can tell that the soundstage is more expensive than a single Sonos One, but don't place your expectations up too high because the sound is still coming from a single physical location. Now, the bass is definitely a notch stronger than the Sonos One. When we move from the Play 1s to the Sonos Ones, even to the Gen 2 of the Sonos Ones, there was an imperceptible improvement in sound. You can't really tell. The Era 100 is a slightly larger speaker than the ones, being 2 centimeters taller and 1 centimeter deeper. Now, it also has a larger woofer than the ones, so that explains the much stronger bass response coming from the Era 100 than the ones. Now, the treble response, however, is harder to evaluate. Now, on the one hand, it sounds wider, and because it sounds wider, it's more diffuse and not so directional. Now, on the other hand, because it is wider, it also sounds airier. Now, as a whole, it doesn't sound worse off than the ones, but how much better is probably the question. Now, there is more treble energy at the top end because Sonos has to balance out the energy from the bottom end, which has now a bigger bass driver. The mid-range response of the Era 100 is where I subjectively felt was much better than the Sonos Ones, because in the initial listening test, I couldn't place the Sonos Ones and the Era 100 side by side for a listening test. It was hard for me to quantify the improvements, but the mid-range response sounds a lot thicker, a lot fuller and warmer, right? Sonos probably had to tweak the crossover point upwards to cater for a larger bass driver. Now it directs more amplification power and sound to fire through the bigger driver, and it has the effect of lending more body to the music, which explains what we are hearing in the mid-range. Now, when it comes to the Era 100, it is very apparent and very clear that they are a superior evolution of the Sonos ones, outperforming them in almost every way when it comes to sound. Now, when it comes to the Era 300, the answer is then both clearer and blurrier. Now, why? So, let me try to explain this. It depends on the optics that you look through when you're evaluating the Era 300. Now, if you're comparing the Era 300 with the outgoing 12-year-old Play 3s, it is obvious that it's a much better speaker all around. You have a much better bass response due to all the improvements that have happened and occurred over the last 12 years, 1 decade, more than a decade. The Play 3s, they have 2 bass drivers, but these bass drivers on the Era 3 are definitely not the same and have very different amplification and electronics driving them. Now, the Era 300 has 4 tweeters as compared to the 1 tweeter on the Play 3s. Now, sound direction and stage is definitely way enhanced and much wider than a single Play 3. Now, mid-range is on another level altogether. So this is the clear part of the answer. But most people aren't actually moving from the Play 3s to the Era 300. And if you are new to Sonos, the comparison is then going to be against the Sonos 5s instead. The Sonos 5s are bass experts. Now, after years of owning the Sonos 5, I'm still floored by the amount of clean, undistorted bass coming out of the 5s. And I have to say, the Era 300 is not coming close to the 5s when it comes to bass. Now, in fact, when it comes to the vocals and the mid-range, the 5s seem to perform better too. But if it is the soundstage and the treble that you are after, the Era 300 takes the lead over the 5s. Again, without a side-by-side comparison, it's going to be a little bit hard to say for sure, but the expensive soundstage with the directional treble, it does make the Era sound like a much more expressive speaker. And that is why I say the answer is blur and not so clear when you look at the Era 300 in comparison with the 5s. Now, the Sonos lineup has expanded considerably over the years with portables and more soundbar offerings, as well as an addition of a Sub Mini. Now, if I were to place the Era 300 within the product offering range, it sits somewhere between the Era 100 and the 5s, but it's an awkward position to occupy. Now, the clearer way to see this is when you consider the Era 300 as a Play 3 replacement, and there is an Era 500 coming to replace the Sonos 5s. Now, in terms of sound quality, I'll place the Sonos 5s right at the top, even against the Era 300. The Era 300 is going to take the second place in terms of sound, right? But it's a close second because of the additional features and capabilities. Now, I'll bring in the Sonos Moves, right, at the third place to complete the picture, even if it is meant as a portable speaker. Now, the Era 100 is going to come in at the fourth place with the Sonos Ones in the fifth position. Now, the Sonos One is going to be discontinued, but you know now where it stands in the whole lineup. Now, the Roam, another portable from Sonos, will then rank below all the rest of the Sonos lineup. Now, to stress again, I'm ranking them only in terms of sound, not value, not features. So the final question is, should you upgrade? Should you place the pre-order? Now, again, a not so clear answer. Let's get to the easier question first. The Era 100, definitely a better buy and value than the Sonos Ones. If you are using the Ones on their own or in stereo configuration for music, moving to the Era 100 will be a definite step up. And they aren't actually a whole lot more expensive than the Sonos Ones, well, at least in the US. But if you're using the Sonos Ones as surround speakers in your home theater, I'll say maybe not. Now, they are not going to give you a lot more in surround sound configuration or performance over the Sonos Ones, but if you currently don't have surrounds, yes, definitely at the Era 100s instead of the outgoing Sonos ones. Now, when it comes to the Era 300, it is a much tougher choice to make. If you are all out for music, the Sonos 5s are sonically superior in almost every aspect, but they don't support Dolby Atmos. So if you wanted Dolby Atmos, you wanted Atmos music, you're going to have to go for the Era 300, trading a little bit of sonic performance off for that spatial audio effect. But if you're out for home theater, then yes, the Era 300 will give you extra Atmos channels, assuming that you have the Beam Gen 2 or the Sonos Arc, which will process Atmos. Now, in the listening test with the Sonos Arc and the Sub Gen 3s, the Era 300 completes the Atmos setup with a 7.2.4 configuration, and that sounded absolutely glorious. Now, the only obstacle is now price. A pair of the Era 300 is going to cost the same as a Sonos Arc and a whole lot more than the Sonos Sub. But if you are out for ultimate and you can afford it, and then it is likely to be the ultimate setup that you can assemble from Sonos as of March 2023. Now, I hope to have given you enough information from my first listening experience with the Era 100 and the 300 to help you make a pre-order decision. Now, guys, I'm not asking you to buy them. I'm laying down the facts and my subjective listening experience to help you decide whether to buy them or not. You can thank me either way. If you decide to buy them, know that I was suitably impressed and that you can thank me later when you get your hands on them on the 28th of March and hear them for yourself in your own setup. Or you can thank me using the Super Thanks button right down below to make a small contribution to my channel to help me keep this channel running. Now, similarly, I have a Patreon account which you can set up a monthly contribution. You can scan the QR code right here, or you can see the link and click through in the video description down below. So I will be getting the review units, but I don't get to keep them for very long. So ultimately, to keep producing the content on the Era speakers, I will end up having to buy them for myself, and they aren't going to be cheap, especially when I have to buy them in pairs. So do consider helping me out a little for the work that I do for the wireless audiophile community, especially you Sonos lovers out there. Now, if you missed my original launch announcement video, it is linked right here, and I discussed the features a lot more in that video. I'll be making a video on the things that Sonos wasn't very clear about when it comes to the Era 100 and the 300, and when that's ready, it will be linked in the video up there. Now, meanwhile, stay tuned and I'll see you guys over in one of those videos.